Hey guys, Trey here. Quick forecast update this morning for our potential severe weather event this afternoon and evening. Today's Wednesday, March 18th. We've got an enhanced risk that extends from the Oklahoma City area down southwest toward the Midland and Abilene areas, with a surrounding slight risk that extends up down to the Mexico-Texas border and up into the Tulsa and northern Oklahoma area with a marginal risk surrounding that. But the biggest threat today is going to be damaging winds from a potential squall line that manifests itself after dark. There will be a tornado threat and a hail threat with initial supercells as well as embedded tornadoes within the line. Lots to talk about this morning, so let's dive right in. Here's our satellite imagery. Um, the big trough that is our weather maker for today is swirling right off the California coast, and it is finally starting to move inland a little bit with some showers and storms ahead of that in northern Mexico right now. If we zoom down into our regional sector, our sub-regional sector for North Texas, let's go ahead and turn on the visible satellite imagery. We can see it's pretty cluttered this morning. We have an ongoing sort of MCS here that is definitely weakening as it moves into northeast Texas. We can see that here on radar. It's basically just a blob of rain right now with some storms back near the Denton and Sherman areas just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro. And as this moves off to the east, it's going to continue to weaken. Potential for some marginally severe wind gusts with that as it moves into the Texarkana region. But this is not going to be a big weather maker today as it moves off to the east. But looks like there is an outflow boundary on surface data. It's hard to see on the satellite imagery, but it's going to be somewhere in here. And so we've got some clearing just to the north of that boundary. But overall, kind of a cluttered sort of satellite image to start the day. But if we go to the surface data here, let's refresh it, make sure it's up to date. So we've got kind of it's a kind of a very diffuse boundary here. It's not a big wind shift at all. It's more of a temperature gradient. So we see up here in Oklahoma, we have temperatures in the 50s. South of there, temperatures in the mid 60s, and then all the way south toward the San Antonio area, temperatures are in the low 70s. So the remember the location of the MCS was right here. The boundary is probably going to be somewhere situated in here. You can see there's not much evidence of a wind shift in here. It's more of a temperature gradient. But north of this boundary, we've got low to mid 60s. South of this boundary, we've got mid 60s to upper 60s and even into the 70s. So if I had to guess, the boundary is draped somewhere in here from about Abilene, Sweetwater, the Abilene Sweetwater area northeast, very close to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then up into the northeast Texas region where that MCS is ongoing right now. This could be a player today with respect to tornado potential. If we can get any supercells to fire along this northeast to southwest oriented dryline, which is right now somewhere over in this vicinity, the Texas-New Mexico border into West Texas. Kind of diffuse at this point, but it's kind of somewhere in there. We have 60s dew points out to the east and southeast of that, 40s dew points out to the west of that. So it's somewhere in the West Texas region right now. It will become much more defined as the day progresses and we get that strong surface, those strong surface southerlies and southeasterlies to inject moisture into central and northwest Texas. So if we go to our big picture here, this is our 500 millibar map analyzed on the SPC mesoanalysis page. We can see that big upper trough centered off the Southern California coast and moving inland. If we remember yesterday, it was located centered right over the Northern California, Central California area, and the main jet max was all the way back here. Well, it's starting to make its way into the desert southwest, and it will make its way into the southern plains by this evening. You can see it's very kind of an elongated upper trough, very deep, with kind of two centers here. One centered over the Nevada-Oregon border, and then one centered off the Southern California coast and the coast of Baja, Mexico. But as this moves off to the south and east today, we can see that kind of here with this progression of the SPC's RAP model. It's going to move off those 90, 100 knot winds, going to move into the northwest Mexico area, West Texas, and into the southern plains by this evening. Let's go ahead and look at the large-scale surface features. Very kind of nebulous at this point. There does sort of seem to be a convectively enhanced sort of warm front here up into southern Kansas, stretching eastward into Missouri and the Midwest, the Ohio Valley area. But not too much going on out here. But as we progress, as that jet max rounds the base of that trough, goes over the Rockies, we're going to get strong surface cyclogenesis by later today. And you can see that on this model. This is 6 hours from now. We get strong cyclogenesis up in eastern Colorado. That is going to help strengthen those surface winds, bring that moisture northwestward, and really sharpen that dry line for later this evening. If we look at some soundings from across the region, let's take a look at some soundings. The SPC sounding page was not updating with the 12Z sounding, so we're on the College of DuPage now. They've got a nice sounding site here for us. Let's take a look at Norman right now, Norman, Oklahoma. See a pretty decent stable layer here at the surface. Decent amount of moisture going up through the column with sort of a semi-dry layer here at 400 and 500 millibars. Let's go ahead and go back, if we can, let's go Dallas-Fort Worth. Wow, very, very saturated profile. That is something you don't see often in the middle of March, but that is a very, very moist profile to work with. Let's go ahead. Let's look at Midland out back to the west, which is closer to our dry line. And we see a very, very noticeable dry layer at about 550 millibars there. But if we take a look at our wind profile, we don't have the hodograph to go along with it like on the SPC page, but we can see ample turning with height in the low levels, with winds increasing significantly above about 500 millibars in strength. So we definitely have some directional shear in the low levels and definitely some speed shear as we go up in the atmosphere. That profile is only going to advect eastward as the day progresses and that the main energy from the trough arrives. So we've got definitely an environment that can produce some severe weather for us. Let's take a look at Amarillo, the Amarillo sounding. Definitely west of the dry line, very much drier profile. But as you can see, we have evidence of an elevated mix layer with this stable layer at the surface here at Amarillo. If we go to Norman, that should set up today, this afternoon. Probably going to hold off convection until later in the afternoon, probably after 5 p.m. Central Time, before the cap breaks. And the good news right now is that we have lots of clearing behind this morning MCS, so shouldn't be too difficult to get that cap to break by late afternoon here in northwest and central Texas. If this was socked in with clouds, I'd be a little more concerned, but lots of pockets of clearing out there to help with solar insolation and to get that cap to break. Let's look at the 850s while we're at it. Some very strong low-level jet out here in parts of East Texas, into Missouri and Arkansas, and into Tennessee and northern Mississippi. As the low levels start to strengthen here this afternoon, I'll show you on the models here in a second. It's hard to see on this map, but we should get a strengthening low-level jet over the central Texas vicinity, very similar to what we have here, which will help out in lengthening our hodographs and adding some curvature to those hodographs to make them very conducive for severe weather, particularly tornadoes. So we've got this dry line, we've got the boundary in play. Let's take a look at how things progress throughout the day. This is the 12Z NAM that's hot off the press. We can see that low starts to move inland, And our forcing is kind of timed a little bit late here, but we do have some semblance of that main energy moving into western Texas by 0Z tonight, 7 p.m. this evening, Central Time. So my guess is storms will begin to fire farther west along that dry line by about 5 o'clock, with potential for storms along that outflow boundary, wherever that outflow boundary intersects that dry line, somewhere right now looking to be in the Abilene Sweetwater area just east of Lubbock. So, not out of the question to get a couple storms to fire along that boundary. And of course, that boundary is going to enhance tornado potential with any storms that can stay isolated. And as we go through the night, that energy really moves into the plains, and that should help force a squall line as the forcing gets really strong overnight. We should get a squall line in Texas and Oklahoma, maybe even into southern Kansas that moves off to the east overnight. Definitely going to be stronger than our current MCS we have out here, and the potential for severe wind gusts is definitely there. Let's go ahead and look at 850s, and you can see what we were talking about with that low-level jet. Here's at 0Z, here's at 3Z. So big time ramp up right at sunset, right after sunset here in the northwest Texas, central Texas into Oklahoma area. So that should help lengthen photographs, and any storms that fire and are able to stay discreet are going to have a pretty good tornado threat if they can remain discreet while this low-level jet starts to ramp up. And then the low-level jet strengthens even more as we get into the overnight hours, and that squall line. That's just going to help force that squall line. And definitely some potential for damaging wind gusts with this, as these strong winds aloft are going to be transported down to the surface. Let's take a look at the surface pattern. So we were talking about how cyclogenesis would occur as that trough went over the Rockies, the main energy. You can see that here by 0Z. We've got a nice well-developed low in eastern Colorado, and that is going to help strengthen those surface winds, turn them out of the back them out of the southeast, and give us ample moisture advection into Oklahoma and Texas for this evening. And we'll zoom in here and give you a hint of that moisture, what that moisture is going to do. Yeah, rapid moistening throughout the day. And this is kind of a new development here with the 12Z NAM. The dry line is oriented more north-south as opposed to northeast to southwest throughout its entirety. That could help things stay more discreet initially, because the flow, if we take a sounding here, let's take a sounding right at the dry line. A forecast sounding here. This is at, that was at 3Z. We wanted at 0Z. DuPage has been having a little bit of issue with their soundings recently. Okay, here's 0Z. We notice our shear vector is 208 degrees, so it's definitely just west of southerly. So that is going to allow there to be a little bit of an angle between this dry line and the shear vectors. So definitely a shear vector that supports a linear storm mode. It's quite parallel to the initiating boundary, especially up here into Oklahoma and down here into southwest Texas. But right here, if this can manifest itself, we get a more north-south dry line. The storm motion will be more off of that dry line, a little bit more perpendicular, and it'll allow those storms to stay a little bit more discreet for some time longer than was expected yesterday. Again, wherever that surface boundary intersects with that dry line, I think is going to have our best potential for tornadoes as well as hail. And if we take a sounding kind of right on that boundary, well ahead of the dry line, this is at 0Z, remember, so 7 p.m. Central Time. Yeah, very unstable atmosphere with very large looping hodographs for us to work with. So definitely tornado potential, definitely going to be some hail potential. We have very steep lapse rates aloft, a very unstable atmosphere. So we could have some significant hail with any supercell that develops and stays isolated. But the main threat will be damaging wind overnight as the dry line sharpens. Those storms start to congeal with that bulk shear vector being pretty parallel to the boundary. Those will congeal as that strong forcing gets into the region, into a big time squall line moving east. affecting probably the Oklahoma City metro area, the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area overnight. So be on the lookout for that. Let's take a look at um, some more soundings. Why don't we? Let's take a look at some more soundings, some more forecast soundings from the NAM. This is at 0Z. Let's take, if you live up in northern Oklahoma or southern Kansas, I wanted to play the warm front up there. Not looking terrible. Some evidence of a stable layer here at the surface, but nice turning if that can be realized and that the NAM's overdoing that surface stable layer. But could be some storms up there. Probably going to be to wait until the better forcing arrives. So later this evening, probably will be the north end of that squall line. Farther down south into southwest Texas, the I-10 corridor, down by Fort Stockton, just east of Fort Stockton. Not great soundings down there. Not nearly as much instability and wind shear. So it looks like the best play. And if we go to from 0Z, this is where remember our low-level jet was going to really ramp up in this region. Let's take a look at Norman, Oklahoma, just for the kicks of it, somewhere around there. Definitely some low-level turning, very unstable atmosphere. One thing to notice is our 3 Cape, our 0 to 3 kilometer instability is very, very strong. So that could help tornado production in any storms that do get going, and as well as any mesovortices in the line of storms overnight. But if we take a look at, let's take a look at sounding right about there, kind of along the I-20 corridor. Yeah, decent turning, not great, but there's some decent turning there. In the vicinity of that boundary, of course, that is definitely going to be enhanced, which the NAM does a very poor job picking up those really small scale features. But as we go to 3Z, that low level jet really ramps up. I bet these photographs really ramp up as well. Yeah, big time increase in the low level photograph there. From that to that. So our low-level jet really spikes during the evening hours. In the low levels, it's about 30 to 40 knots there in northwest Texas. So any storm that can stay discrete right before or right around sunset, going to have a big-time tornado potential if it is by itself. Again, that's the caveat, if it's by itself. Let's take a look at some cams now. Let's take a look at the HRR. This is the HRRR model. So we have evidence of that squall line that we see right now. That's looking pretty good. And then this model is firing storms right along that boundary dryline intersection, just to the east of Lubbock, near the Abilene area. These will have a tornado potential as they move off to the northeast. They remain fairly semi-discrete until later in the evening they kind of congeal into a squall line. And then you have the trailing storms out there as the main forcing arrives. Let's take a forecast sounding. This is at 0Z. Let's take a forecast sounding, maybe at 1Z when they're really mature, right at sunset, just to their southeast. Yeah, and that is pretty darn good. Not much to dislike about that sounding. Fairly unstable, 2 to 3,000 Cape, large looping photographs as that low-level jet really ramps up 40 knots at 1 kilometer. That's very, very strong low-level jet. So giving us effective helicities of over 400 meters squared per second squared. That's definitely what we want to see with an uncapped, unstable atmosphere. Our 0 to 3 kilometer Cape in this model showing above 100. Very, very good. So any storm that's able to stay discrete. And so if this pans out, definitely will have a tornado threat, maybe even a strong tornado threat as they move off to the east, potentially affecting areas close to the Dallas-Fort Worth area later this evening. So the ARW just coming in as well. Let's take a look at that. This is the 12Z run. And so this model also firing some storms out on that boundary dryline intersection near the Abilene Sweetwater area. And wow, that is very impressive. As they move off to the northeast, they're definitely a tail end Charlie there. Maybe semi-discrete at this point, potentially forming into a line segment. Wow, and this keeps them discrete through just after sunset, and that's when our low-level jet's going to ramp up. So definitely need to keep an eye out on this area for development that stays isolated. throughout the early evening hours. Here's the NSSL WRF model. Let's see what it shows. Wow, it has some storms all the way out, well ahead of everything, up in the area just north of the DFW Metroplex. So that's an interesting development there. There's our kind of main batch of storms out to the east with a big squall line after dark as expected as that main forcing arrives. So cams are kind of pinpointing this region right here in central and northern, and maybe even into northeast Texas throughout the late afternoon and early evening hours. Storms look like they will form potentially about 5 to 6 o'clock and will be isolated at first. So any storm that, again, stays isolated throughout the early evening, as that low-level jet ramps up, definitely going to have a tornado threat. And based on some of the forecast soundings, potentially a strong tornado threat. One last thing here is this is the SPC's SHREF model, Short Range Ensemble Forecast. These are the SIGTOR probabilities. And so this is at 0Z this evening. So it's definitely pinpointing this region out here, kind of along that outflow boundary for the highest severe potential, which is exactly what we were thinking. And then by early evening, this is at 3Z, transitions to a big time squall line here, highlighting the severe potential back out here to the west in more of a linear configuration along that dry line / Pacific cold front. So looks like the threat is going to be out here to the east along that boundary at first, then transitions to kind of that threat along the squall line as the evening progresses. So if I were chasing today, I'd probably target somewhere around the Abilene-Sweetwater area to start, just to the south and east of Lubbock, and see if we can get those discrete storms to fire along that boundary. Definitely looks like it could be a pretty good tornado day for any chasers that go down there. So if you're going out, stay safe. Definitely going to have to see how this outflow boundary evolves throughout the day and where that dry line sets up exactly. But looking like something like the Abilene-Sweetwater area initially, and then before that squall line forms this evening. So if you're going out chasing today, stay safe. Hope you catch something good. Stay healthy, as always, here with this coronavirus outbreak. Stay healthy, wash your hands, be mindful, and we will see you under the mezzo. Thanks for watching.